The governments of the world, including the United States here, are in fact creating a new world order. Those of us who don't realize that by now just have been asleep, Rip Van Winkle style. We have been asleep if we don't understand that. They have developed a technique to make their plans palatable to the average citizen. It seems so unreasonable, at least to me, that any Western government, with the Western people as we are, could possibly create national goals and make laws to further those goals, which are totally contrary to the customs, the morals, the religion, and the civilization of we the people, without violent objections. It just seems incredible to me. We have had revolutions and insurrections and uprisings in the past for just a fraction of the reasons that they have given us in the last 50 years. And yet, nary a peep. We just seem to enjoy it. We're just laying down and just letting the steamroller roll over us. It's incredible when you think about it. Think about all that has happened in the Western world, well, in the entire world. What has happened in particular to the Christian West since World War II. The entire British Empire folded without a peep. There wasn't any insurrection or revolution of any sort anywhere. And all of it, starting with India following World War II, all of those colonies of the once great British Commonwealth disappeared. Think about South Africa, what is going on there. And it is just a reflection as to what had earlier gone on in Rhodesia. Here was Rhodesia, one of the colonies that totally disappeared, and it's turned into a black tribal dictatorship. And the white Christian people didn't rise up in violent objection to what was going on. Yes, there were people like you and me that were violently objecting, but they were shoved aside. They didn't exist. Nobody paid any attention to them. And in fact, they were made out to be bad people. How did it happen? Think in terms of South Africa. The same thing is happening in South Africa. And yet, there's not one bit of violent objection out so that we can see it. And no one seems to even discuss, well, hey, our neighbor Rhodesia went down the tubes here, and these people in Rhodesia are living the white people in Rhodesia are living a horrible life right now. And yet, South Africa is doing nothing about it. Think about the forced immigration into all of the Western nations of third and fourth world peoples. They are being forced upon the Western peoples. Many of us are objecting to this. We have written documentation about this, but they are being forced upon us. Now, I don't mean just a few thousand. I'm talking about millions upon millions of people who will never be assimilated into citizens who would be carrying their own weight. There's no possible way that that can happen. Because again, the people are entirely different. Different customs, different morals, different religions. Now, that's not to say that they're lesser people, but they cannot be assimilated into our customs, our morals, our religion, our civilization without our customs, morals, and civilization being destroyed. Think about the forced movement of manufacturing plants and multinational corporations into these same third and fourth world countries that all of these millions have come over here to get on our dole, think in terms of all of the multinational corporations that are going over there in order to get cheap, nearly free labor in these third and fourth world countries. So you can see the balance that is being intended. They're going to have the few remaining ones over there, and they will be the more intelligent ones in those countries that will be staying there because they were told to stay. It'll be to their advantage. And they will be the cheap workers in the manufacturing plants to send back the goods coming to us that we will buy from a system that Zbigniew Brzezinski says in his book, Between Two Ages, The Service and Communications Society of America. Think about how these things are happening and all of the millions and millions of jobs that are being taken from the American people right now. Even the unions that once upon a time would turn over railroad cars and automobiles and trucks and put fire and torch different properties like the French farmers are doing today, think about a total lack of that drive, that zeal that would have caused them to do it a short 50 years ago. Certainly there are some who are fighting it, and I'm looking at them. You here are at the tip of this. You here understand these things, and you here are trying to do something about it. You don't perhaps know how it happened, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. How did it happen that would have caused our people to become so lethargic? Very simply. And that's what I'd like to talk about today. Could the average person believe that what is happening to us today is for the good? Could it possibly be that? To the average person walking the streets, he does think that. He believes it's for the good of the nation. He believes it's for the good of the world. He believes that it's for his own personal good, for his family. As it was mentioned just in the last sermon, that as 50% of our married people are divorced, and we have homosexuality, we have crime, we have extramarital and illicit sex, etc., rampant in the country, but still people say that all of this is for our good. How could this be? Could it be that a form of mass psychology has been played upon us? Could it be? The text for this message is found in Isaiah 5, starting in verse 10 or 20. Very simple, and I won't be reading much out of it. We'll go back to it later. Woe unto them that call evil good and good evil, that put darkness for light and light for darkness, that put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Woe unto them that are wise in their own eyes and prudent in their own sight. And this is exactly the condition that exists today. Evil has been made good, and those who are good, at least try to be good, are made evil. And those who do all of this are prudent in their own eyes, wise in their own eyes, and prudent in their own sight. We have that identical, exact condition taking place. As we continue, I will go back to Isaiah to tell you the rest of the story. There has been, and I will prove it here, a mass psychology used on us. The technique of mass psychology was developed shortly after World War II. Now, I know there will be those who say, hey, no, wait a minute. We had psychology and we had people who were doing things in a psychological manner upon us for many, many years before. But it wasn't official. It was done organizationally, individually, group-wise, this sort of thing, for a singular purpose, for their own benefit. But from a mass psychology point of view, from government to people, official, it all started since World War II. It started here in the United States of America, and it was taught here in the United States of America. It was then exported to all of the nations of the West. And that's what we're going to be talking about. I will be giving the names of the perpetrators and how they did it. And when you see this, you're not going to believe it because it's so simple. But that's what they did. It all started with the great debate over the fluoridation of the nation's water supplies. It was here in that program the technique was developed, and it was so successful that it expanded to all of the other walks of life, government and private. And they did this all in the name of preventing tooth decay in our children. How sweet. How good. Since that is where the technique of mass psychology was developed, I would like to give the details on how they did it in that program. Then we will explain and give the expansion of that, of their successes in other programs. They simply rationalized that if it would work in the fluoridation program, it would work in all of the other needs that they have to create a one-world government. And it works so well. And I would venture to say that, notwithstanding this group probably less than most, but even here, as you go into a supermarket or a grocery store to get your toothpaste, you try to find a toothpaste that doesn't have fluorine in it. It is total what they have done to us. You try to go into a city water supply and drink from a fountain downtown or what have you, and you're going to get fluorine in it almost in every case. It is total how they did it, and our people love to have it so. They rationalized that if it would work in one, it would work on all the rest. In order to show you just how extensive and how terrible and how evil this actually is, I need to first give you just how bad fluorine is for you. And this is not me talking, but how bad is fluorine? As early as 1850, 140 some years ago, fluoride emissions from the iron and copper industries all over the world poisoned crops, they poisoned livestock, and they poisoned people. By the turn of the century, 1900, lawsuits and regulations in England and in Germany forced the industries to at least build taller smokestacks in order to distribute the fluoride over a wider area. Therefore, less would fall on any one person, with the thought, noble as it may have sounded, that that lesser amount would not be dangerous. And of course, that was an error. We knew that now. We know it now, but they didn't at the time. They at least tried. That was in England, and it was in Germany. Even in the early United States government, we also had government agencies that knew of the dangers. In 1901, scientific studies showed that fluoride compounds are much more toxic than other compounds of significance in the industrial smoke problem. They released documentation after documentation on it. The U.S. Department of Agriculture has stated that airborne fluorides have caused more damage to domestic animals than any other air pollutant. Now one would say, well, what's that got to do with water? It doesn't make much difference how that fluoride enters the body. Getting it into the body is what hurts. And they started finding it in the air. And then, of course, they go on to the water. The International Journal of Environmental Studies have shown that fluoride is by far the most toxic to vegetation, animals, and humans, and is the most toxic substance known. That is coming from the International Journal of Environmental Studies. It is extremely toxic. As late as the 1960 through the 1970 period, up in the New York and the Canadian St. Regis Mohawk Indian Reservation, there was a terrible calamity that took place, even in the 60s and 70s. And I will guarantee you it wasn't on national news. I will guarantee you that only up in the St. Lawrence River Valley was this information even known to the public of the United States. The herds of cows were so infected with fluoride poisoning that they had to crawl around on their bellies. And they gave birth to their calves in that stance, to stunted calves, all because of fluoride. They couldn't stand up. Crops and the trees withered. The birds and the bees flew and got out of the area so they themselves would be able to survive. Even today, right at this moment, casts dipped into the St. Lawrence River bring up ulcerated fish with spinal deformities, all because of fluoride poisoning. They find the fluoride in the spine. Mohawk Indians sued the Reynolds Aluminum Company and also Alcoa, the Aluminum Corporation of America. These are the two giant members of the aluminum industry. They sued for $150 million, and after 5 years of litigation, the tribe was broke, destitute, and the government gave them back all of $650,000. They, by no means, paid them for the damages that they saw, and we will see that continuing in other cases. In 1933, the Moose Valley in Belgium realized also a disaster. Several thousand people became violently ill and 60 of them died, all from fluoride poisoning, chronic fluoride poisoning. Then finally, scientists in the United States of America began to discuss the problem. In 1933, the United States Department of Agricultural Scientists openly stated that the serious nature of fluoride toxicity has been realized. Finally, they begin to wake up. Their senior toxicologist, Dr. Lloyd Dietz, he stated this: "It is a well-established fact that chronic poisoning may manifest itself in man after constant exposure over many years to fluoride." He publicly stated this. Other scientists within the government risked their careers as they studied and printed literature on their findings. 8 different studies have been shown that there has been an increase of bone fractures in both male and females during this period of time. Low levels of fluoride may increase the risk of hip fracture in the elderly. They have found that. The United States of America, where fluoride is official, has the highest hip fracture rate of all nations in the world. We're talking serious business here. This is bad stuff. There were twice as many bone defects found in young males in the fluoridated city of Newburgh, New York, as compared to the unfluoridated city nearby of Kingston, New York. There was that much of an increase. there is a 5 to 10% increase in total cancer rates in the United States cities where fluoride is put into the water versus those where it is not. There has been a 70% increase in the rate of bone cancer in males under 20 years of age in those areas where fluoride is added to the drinking water. In New Jersey, there has been a rate of bone cancer among young males under 20. Now, I don't know why, young males under 20, but some reason or another, they're very susceptible to this poisoning. That rate has been 6 times as high as it has been in other cities where no fluorine has been put in the water. But now fluorine is in about all the cities of America. You're getting fluorine. Now there's another issue that we must discuss on how evil this is that really shows the bottom line why they want fluorine in the water. Because this fits now with the rest of the mass psychology that I'll be explaining. It is the effect that fluoride has on the human brain. As early as the 1930s, with money coming from New York, Wall Street, German scientists, the I.W. Faber Corporation, worked on the effects of fluoride on the human brain. They readily found that an area in the left rear cortex was particularly sensitive to fluoride compounds. Some reason or another, there's a place right back here that causes fluoride to rest there, and it's very effective on the human brain. They discovered that by constant application on this fluoride, fluoride to the person or people, the human brain becomes passive and lethargic. Now, to me, this clearly shows that what has been done is for evil purposes. In addition, even now, scientists are discovering a definite relationship between constant exposure to fluoride and Alzheimer's disease. Now, all of us here know the dangers of cooking in aluminum and this sort of thing. We know the dangers of aluminum and its relationship to Alzheimer's disease. We already know that. But fluoride comes from aluminum. So even being around aluminum, cooking in aluminum pots and pans and so forth, what is it that you're getting out of it that is so dangerous to you with relation to Alzheimer's disease? In all probability, residual fluoride. All right, so they discovered the relationship between the two. Now, I believe that there's much, much more on just how evil this is. But I think this is enough to show you just how evil this really is and what it really means to we as a people and what it has done to us as a Western Christian civilization. Because it is in all of the Western industrial nations where this has taken its toll. And it is in all of the Western industrial nations that is now in the problems that I described up front here as to what we are seeing in the way of a one-world government. It is the West, the Christian West, that is really doing this, and not a peep out of any of our leaders in the churches. Not a peep. The news media has followed suit and has refused to discuss it. Okay, how did they do it? In the late 1920s, the Public Health Service was then under the Treasury Department. Guess what? Just like the IRS is today and just like the BATF is today. They're here to help you. It was under the Treasury Department. The Treasury Secretary at that time was a man of the name of Andrew W. Mellon. And we have all heard of the Mellon family. He was a founder and a major stockholder of the Aluminum Corporation of America. So it was clearly to his advantage, but not as an individual, but as a purpose. He was part and parcel to a purpose as to why this was done. It was to his advantage because the American public was becoming aware of the evils of fluoridation in the water supply. Fluoride compounds out of the smokestacks. They wanted something done about it. They had to put it to rest in the late 1920s. He sent a public health service dentist, the name of Dr. Trendley Dean, to certain towns in the West, and you've all read about this, I'm sure, from time to time. Because out in certain towns in the West, they found that there was an unusually high amount of fluorine naturally in the water. And so they sent him out there to study these towns, study the peoples, and to see just what it was going on with respect to the cavities in the teeth. He found the teeth of these residents highly mottled or discolored, and they found them also to be highly eroded. Now that's very significant. Why would those bones be, those teeth be eroded, and they would be discolored, but they also had fewer cavities? For some reason or another, there were fewer cavities in those teeth. Well, even Dr. Dean cautioned. He said that studies must be made to determine the bad effects to the bones. They paid no attention to it. They ignored that statement. The Mellon Institute was ecstatic. They immediately directed their own biochemist by the name of Gerald Fox to paint the teeth, or Gerald Cox, to paint the teeth of a few rats. Cox concluded that there was a reduced number of cavities, just like the water in the West in these certain towns. He said the case should be regarded as proved. Disregarding Dean's caution, threw it to the winds, forget it all, we proved it, let's go to work with it. So in 1939, the first public proposal was made to put thousands of tons of waste byproducts of the aluminum industry into the water supply. 1939. Now you would say, well now, hey, why don't we just take this stuff? We know it's poisonous. Why don't we just take the stuff, dig a great big hole and put it in the ground? That's where it came from in the first place, in bauxite. Now that sounds logical, doesn't it? But you have lost the basic purpose of putting it in the water. You did two things. You got rid of thousands of tons of fluoride, because we're all carrying it around in our body. It goes in the water, it's dissolved, you drink the water, and you carry it around until you're dead. And at the same time, you see, you got rid of all the fluoride, but at the same time, they've done something else to you. They have made you lethargic. They have made you passive. Oh, isn't this sweet? Come on, roll over me with a steamroller. That's exactly what their intention was. Well, when Cox stated this, initially doctors and dentists and scientists were skeptical. But God's in command. For some reason, it all has to play itself out. We know that. World War II came along at the right time for them. Any opposition had to be kept quiet. Because if you had opposition to this, all of a sudden you were un-American and you were a neo-Nazi and all of this sort of stuff, don't you see? You couldn't offend this system because we had a war going on to make the world safe for democracy. Following the war, even then, in 1945, 6, and 7, there were hundreds of claims filed against the courts for that pollution and poisoning that it caused in the people. In every case, the government gave settlements for the livestock and the vegetation, but they didn't give 1 penny for human suffering. Now that shows something else to us, that we as human beings are expendable to this railroaded system of one world government. You're nothing to the system. In 1947, to stop all dissidents, Alcoa brought in their top lawyer, a Mr. Oscar R. Ewing, and submitted him to the government to be the head of what is now health, education, and welfare. He was in charge of the public health service. This man, Oscar Ewing, was to play a big part in the development of the system of mass psychology that was to be used on the people of the United States, as well as our sister countries in Europe. For nearly 50 years now, the American people, as well as our brothers and sisters in Europe, have been subjected to psychological warfare by deranged monsters for the purpose of making us submit to a one-world government. Mr. Oscar Ewing, the chief lawyer of Aluminum Corporation, controlled by the Mellon family, hired the nephew of Sigmund Freud. The nephew of Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud, as we all know, was the master of deranged minds, and he made good into evil and evil into good with his form of psychiatry. The nephew's name was Edward L. Bernays. He was a devout student of his uncle, Sigmund Freud. Edward L. Bernays. For those of you who can remember, old-timers in the movement will remember another man by the name of Paul Bernays, who penetrated Sheldon Emery's church in Phoenix, Arizona, and did considerable damage. Same family. Mr. Ewing hired Walter Bernays for the purpose of developing a system which would cause the American people to think of something as evil as intentionally subjecting us to the fluoride poisoning as being good for our health. Walter Bernays was so masterful in the way he did it that the Washington Post, even in November 1991, wrote an article about Walter Bernays, and they called him the original spin doctor. You know the name. You've heard it in articles you've read here of recent years. It's become an in-word. You hear it on the news, the Washington News and stuff like this, where they call such and such a spin doctor. Bernays was also called the father of public relations. The term spin doctor is very simply the worldly term currently being used to divine Isaiah's words, "Woe unto them that call evil good and good evil." That's spin doctrine. That's what we call it today. Walter Bernays is also the author of the book simply titled Propaganda. It was published in 1928. In that book, Bernays, the nephew of Sigmund Freud, he wrote about, and I quote this, quote, "The structure of the mechanism which controls the public mind and how it is manipulated by the special pleader." And this word pleader is just his term for public relation man, the one who pleads the case. That's his term for that. Yeah, how it is manipulated by the special pleader who seeks to create acceptance for a particular idea or commodity. Quoting them some more. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. Our minds are molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by men we have never heard of. Walter Bernays wrote that. Continuing. If you can influence the group leaders either with or without their conscious cooperation, you automatically influence the group which they sway. Walter Bernays wrote that. Then he went on to explain how the system works. It is so simple that our minds can't believe that this technique is so effective. They can't believe it. But as history has proven, it is effective, and our people have been brainwashed. He wrote this, continuing. Supposing the public relation man for the Beechnut Bacon Company wanted to dramatically increase the sale of bacon to the public, he would suggest to the physicians in the country to state publicly that it is wholesome to eat bacon. Walter Bernays wrote this in his book, Propaganda. He would show proof, whether true or not is immaterial, he would show proof, quote unquote, to the physicians that it is true, that it is wholesome to eat bacon. He continues, we know as a mathematical certainty that large numbers of persons will follow the advice of their doctors because the public relations man understands the psychological relationship of dependence on men, or of men, on their physicians. In other words, that relationship of dependence, in effect, has elevated the physician to God with a little g. That's what's happened. And it's not only with physicians now, you understand. It's with many other people, as we will see in just a moment. Any other people in positions of leadership whom we have to have. So we have made gods with a little g out of these people, and Bernays recognizes this, and Bernays has used that in his technique, going on to explain. He goes on to explain the importance of conveniently stating to the physicians, Beechnut Bacon Company now, talking to physicians about the wholesomeness of bacon, while you are suggesting that they go public on the wholesomeness of bacon, who the people and organizations are that oppose the idea that bacon is wholesome. It's very important. That, according to Bernays, is the key to the psychology. And hear me out now. It's so simple, you say, we can't do it. He used this technique in the selling of the use of fluoride to the public. He simply substituted the word fluoride instead of bacon, and he substituted the word dentist for the word physicians. And we got to have dentists too. Then, as the dentists were being convinced that fluoride was good, even though in their own mind they knew it wasn't, but they were being convinced by this public relation man that the fluoride was good for the children's teeth because there were fewer cavities involved, the statement was widely distributed, and this is history, that the opponents of fluoride were kooky scientists, convicted felons, food faddists, scientific organizations, and the then powerful John Birch Society and the Ku Klux Klan. Are you beginning to see how they've done it to us? Do you understand it? Continuing. Everybody bit hook, line, and sinker, except a few old, hard-headed sheep like us.
Amen.
We haven't bit, but we're enemies for it. We are enemies because of it. If all of those dumb organizations and evil organizations, such as the Ku Klux Klan and the convicted felons and so forth, were against the use of fluoride, then it must be very good indeed. It doesn't make any difference what you and I think that Bernays' plan would or wouldn't work. Doesn't make any difference to you and me. You would say, well, the American people aren't that simple. Well, it did work, and apparently we are that simple. How else can I say it? If it worked, we got to be simple. The average person thinks of Carl Sagan when the word scientist is mentioned. That mouthy head that gets up and says nothing. Certainly convicted felons can't be trusted, can they? Certainly you don't want to believe food faddists, do you? Because you know junk food, going down to Wendy's and the big arches and so forth, that's good for you. I mean, it's real good, it's tasty and so forth, it's fast. So food faddists can't be good. They've got to be classified among the evil. The public believed that the John Birch Society and the Ku Klux Klan were extremists, so they're no good. They are enemies of society, so you don't want to believe them, do we? So there is the system. Let me review just very quickly here how it works. The public relations, or we will call him that, whoever it is trying to get this convinced in the public mind, goes to the leaders of society. Doesn't make any difference whether they're dentists, doctors, lawyers, whoever. But they go to the leaders of society whom the people trust. Now, they wouldn't go to a lawyer because people don't trust lawyers. But they would go certainly to a dentist, they would go to a doctor, but they're going to go to somebody else, as we will show in just a moment, and hold them up in high esteem. They're very much dependent on them. And so they go to them, and he convinces these leaders that his cause is correct, and it is an issue that needs to be publicly supported. They get these leaders to publicly support that issue. They prove that the issue is a good issue. So they get it done. In the process of convincing these leaders, the PR man very strategically, and they're clever, mentions the names of the opponents to his cause that the public doesn't like. If the leaders themselves don't like these opponents, so much the better. The news media will pick up on it just like that because it is the leaders doing the talking and not the public relation man. It is the leaders of society whom we trust. The little g's, etc., God's with little g's, etc., but whoever the leaders may be, whoever we are dependent upon, it is they talking, and so the news media picks up on it. The names of the opponents must be carefully selected. Examples of names that would currently be used that would make good opponents for any cause to this public relation man would be Gaddafi of Libya, Hussein of Iraq, the Irish Republican Army, Fidel Castro of Cuba, and of course we can add to that white Christian separatists. We can add to that racists. We can add to it neo-Nazis. We can add to it identity. We can add to it constitutionalists. We can add to it tax protesters. And still, of course, the same old Ku Klux Klan. We can add all of these names to it. These are all bad names. Now, how did they get to be bad names? He wouldn't use the names of opponents that the public would like. If there aren't any opponents to the public relation man cause, he has to create them. And that is what they have done. They have created the bad names to do their will. That is the way they have repeatedly done it since the fluoridation story. Now let me give you some current examples of exactly the same thing and how they did it. The government was able to do what it did with the Gordon Call case without any repercussions whatsoever from the public. Nothing. The public was told that Gordon Call was a tax protester. That's a bad word, even though in the public's eyes, he was made bad, but even though there are millions and millions of tax protesters out there that cheat on their 1040, that don't pay taxes, etc., etc., every chance they get they cheat, and yet that same person would say the name tax protester is evil. So he accepts the idea that tax protester is evil. Gordon Call was a tax protester. Gordon Call was a white separatist because God told him to be separate. And he taught his children to be separate. He taught the community to be separate. So that's a bad word. He was a constitutionalist. That was a bad word. He was a member of the Christian Identity Movement. That's certainly a bad word. All of these terms are bad words to the public. At the same time now, who was the one elevated up there? The gods of the little g. The U.S. Marshal Service. We've had article after article about how William Safer has elevated the U.S. Marshal Service into a very, very high standard of law enforcement. So high that they would do no wrong, would they? They're very professional, and they're very righteous. They are the apex of the law enforcement, along with the FBI. These two organizations are called the epitome of our protectors of society. The state police and the sheriff's departments and the public are the public protectors. And Bush repeatedly, we've heard him on message after message talk about how we have to give the police what they need, how we have to protect them. They are, and whenever what happened to Deegan up there in the Randy Weaver case? 5,000 people went to his funeral. He didn't know 5,000 people. How did they get there? These policemen are as evil as they can be, and you and I know it. They're on the take, half of them. And yet, we elevate them into gods with a little g, because we think we have to be dependent upon it. And you can't give your children to one of them and take them across the street at a busy street corner. But we made little g, gods with a little g out of them. The exact same situation took place in the Randy Weaver case. The national police force with the good guys. And the public is dependent upon them. They sent them up there by the droves. 800 plus all of the National Guard, etc. Just like the physicians and the dentists were back in the case of the fluoride story. The Randy Weaver family represented the evil which the public thinks should be destroyed. Jesus taught us this very thing in Matthew 16. In verse 17 of John 15, he says this, "These things I command you, that you love one another. If the world hates you, you know it hated me before it hated you. If ye were of the world would love his own. But because ye are not of the world system, the world customs, mores, etc. But I have chosen you out of that system, out of the world, therefore the world hateth you." Chapter 16 and verse 2. "They shall put you out of the synagogues, yea, the time cometh that whosoever killeth you will think that they had doeth God service. And these things they will do unto you, because they have not known the Father nor me." Think about the Mellon family. Think about Sigmund Freud, Walter Bernays. Who were they? They certainly weren't Christian. They came right from the synagogues, just as Jesus said that's what was going to happen. And what about Mr. Oscar Ewing? Jesus told us in Matthew 25 and in verse 15, Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For ye compass sea and land to make one proselyte, and when he is made, he will make him twofold more the child of hell than yourselves. It is Oscar Ewing, the head lawyer of the Mellon Institute, that you can really point your finger at. And I will just say anything to you in my mind that he probably went to a good Judeo-Christian church. There's a good thing in all of this. John told us in Revelation 18, verses 5 and 6. For her sins have reached unto heaven, and God hath remembered her iniquities. Reward her even as she rewarded you, and double unto her double according to her works. In the cup which she hath filled, fill unto her double. We must look at this information on how they have created mass psychology on the people as an opportunity. The knowledge that you now have is an opportunity if you will be just think about it. We can turn that around. We can use it for good. Knowing how they did it is step one. And then going from there to doing it for God's will is step two. Turn to the book of Isaiah, and we will close there again in chapter 5. I said at the beginning of this message that Isaiah also told us the rest of the story. Start in verse 13, chapter 5 of Isaiah. Therefore my people are gone into captivity, because they have no knowledge. But you have a little bit more right now than you had maybe 45 minutes ago. And their honorable men are famished, and their multitude dried up with thirst. Therefore hell hath enlarged herself, and opened her mouth without measure, and their glory, and their multitude, and their pomp, and he that rejoiceth shall descend into it. They are rejoicing now, you know. Oh, yeah. They think they have it all locked up tight. It's not quite over yet. He that rejoiceth shall descend into it, and the mean man shall be brought down, and the mighty man shall be humbled, and the eyes of the lofty shall be humbled. But the Lord of hosts shall be exalted in judgment, and God that is holy shall be sanctified in righteousness. Godspeed today. Maranatha. Thank you.